Today is the 17th day of the month of Teves. We are in the middle of chapter 42, discussing the laws and proper conduct of meals. We'll be going from paragraph 20 through the end of the chapter, paragraph 23, and we're going to start chapter 43, which discusses the laws of blessings for foods that one eats or drinks during a meal. In chapter 43, we'll be doing paragraphs 1 through 3. So, chapter 42, paragraph 20. We saw yesterday in paragraph 19 that one is not supposed to leave the house if they're in the middle of a meal before saying Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meal. However, if he's eating with other people, then he could tell somebody who's staying at the table, I'm stepping out of the room for a minute, I'm stepping out of the house for a minute actually. You be my shomer for me, you be my, you keep the meal going, so to speak. So when I return, then since there's somebody here keeping the meal going, it's not like the meal ended, it's not a problem leaving in that case because somebody at the table who's continuing the meal on your behalf. So in such a case, as long as you speak to that person beforehand, you are able to leave the meal in the middle, go to another house, go to another location, and then come back to continue your meal without any issues. Paragraph 21. I really mentioned this yesterday as well when we talked about not leaving the house during a meal. If someone knows when they're sitting down to eat that they're going to be continuing their meal somewhere else, a typical example is you're going on a trip, so you're going to wash in the house, have a little piece of bread in the house, but you're going to continue eating in the car. So since in the beginning when you made the hamotzi, you knew you were going to be doing that, then it's not a problem as long as you make sure the second place that you are, you have at least a kazayas worth of bread, which we said is approximately the volume of 0.6 fluid ounces to approximately 1.1 fluid ounces. Paragraph 22. Let's say you're in the middle of your meal and you realize, it's time for me to pray the afternoon service. So you get up to pray the afternoon service. Is that considered like a break to the meal? If you want to sit down afterwards, do you have to start your meal from scratch, do another hamotzi? Or do you say, no, it was interruption in the middle, but not a complete interruption. Your meal still continues. Or what about if somebody has to get up in the middle to go to the bathroom? Is that considered a break? Now, you might think nowadays going to the bathroom is not a big deal. You just go to the bathroom in the house and you're back, a few seconds later. But remember, it used to be people would have to go outside to that house. It could have been a bigger deal, especially in the cold and the winter. You have to bundle up to go outside to go to the bathroom. So would that be considered an interruption? If one does that, do we say at this point the meal's over? If you want to continue eating afterwards, you have to restart again and do another hamotzi. Another case that the Shulchan Aruch talks about over here. What about, this happens to me very often Friday night. We're having a nice long Friday night Shabbos dinner, and there's a lot of courses, and there's a lot of schmoozing, and a lot of singing different songs, and sharing Torah thoughts, and it's at the end of a long week. And very often I find myself nodding off in the middle, falling asleep at my seat at the table. So if somebody falls asleep at the table, is that considered a break in the meal? That when they such a break that when they wake up, it's like the first meal is over, they don't have to do hamotzi again. What do you say about what do we say about all those cases? So the answer is that in all those cases, it's not considered a break. You could keep eating after you wake up. You don't have to worry about doing another hamotzi. You're good to go. However, if somebody would have gone to sleep in bed, they actually left the table, went and lay down in bed, and then they woke up and they wanted to continue the meal, in that case, they would require another hamotzi because going to sleep in bed, that's considered a real solid break. That means the meal is over. Therefore, if you want to start again, just like any time, you need to do another hand washing, another hamotzi from the beginning. Paragraph 23. If you decided, you said, all right, the meal is over, everybody, let's bench. And then at that point, your wife or somebody brings out a nice cake for dessert. You're like, oh my goodness, I'm not ready to bench yet. I need a piece of that cake. So what happens over there? Do you say that since you decided to bench, that's considered the conclusion of the meal? And now if you want to keep continuing the meal, you have to start from scratch. You need another hand washing, another blessing on the bread? Or do you say, no, you were planning on benching, but you changed your mind. It's not a problem. You planned on ending the meal, but so what? Now just keep eating the meal. You didn't see the after blessing yet. So this gets very complicated because there are some things that we could do if we start the mezumin, which is the leading of the end. Saying shir hamalas would not be a problem. That the paragraph say at the end of the meal. But if we start a mezumin where you have somebody leading the benching, they begin saying the lines that they say. Or if you start doing mayim achronim where you wash your hands at the end of the meal, we're going to learn about that a little later. So in these scenarios, it could really be complications about starting up the meal again if you already did these things. It might be the meal is halachically considered ended, and if you want to start again, you do have to wash your hands again. You do need another blessing on bread. So in such a case, don't start up the meal again. Just do the after blessing, just bench. If you want cake, do it after you finish benching and make another blessing on it later on. We'll talk about that soon. And but you should bench at that point. You should do the after blessing. Don't try restarting a meal because it creates a lot of halachic complications. Chapter 43. The laws of blessings for foods that one eats or drinks during a meal. Paragraph 1. The general rule of thumb is when you make hamotzi, you make a blessing on bread, and you're having bread as part of your meal, then generally that blessing covers almost anything you're eating in the meal. Whether you're having meat, fish, different side dishes, rice, whatever it's going to be, salads, that blessing that you made on the bread, the hamotzi lechem and haaretz, that covers almost everything. Likewise, when you say the birchat hamazon, the after blessing for bread, then that also covers everything that you ate during the meal. Paragraph 2. Similarly, we were talking about food before, also all drinks. Any drinks somebody has during the meal, that blessing that we made on the bread, that covers any drinks that we're having during the meal. The exception to this one is wine. Wine is considered so important, has such significance, that the blessing on bread does not cover wine. And a wine requires its own blessing, even in the middle of a meal. You have to make a blessing on it of Barachata Hashem al-Kedim HaCholam, Brei Pri Hagafen, who created the fruit of the vine. Now, if you made a blessing on wine before the meal, then that would cover any wine you're having during the meal. So, for example, this is what we do every single week on Shabbos by Kiddush. We make a blessing on wine before the meal begins, and that covers any more wine we're going to have in the middle of the meal. But like we saw a few chapters back, when you make that blessing on Kiddush, you have in mind, this is also going to cover anything during the meal as well. We're going to see another example towards the end of this chapter where a drink might need its own blessing, but wine is the catch-all for all drink blessings. So once you make a blessing on wine, you don't have to worry about making a blessing on any other drink because wine includes everything else. There are those that say that if you're having liquor during the meal, you're having some schnapps, some whiskey, then that would require a separate blessing. But again, remember, if you're at a Shabbos meal where you had some wine earlier, that covers it. Even if you're not at a Shabbos meal, or if you didn't have wine earlier, then still there are some opinions that we don't make a blessing, and the common practice is to not make a blessing even on a whiskey during a meal. Paragraph 3. Another big exception to all this is fresh fruit. If somebody's having fresh fruit, even in the middle of the meal, that's not considered a normal thing to eat in the middle of a meal. Fresh fruit we'll have at a meal because it tastes good, just to stimulate the taste buds a little bit, but it's not considered part of the main part. It's not considered a main part of the meal, and therefore fresh fruit do require their own blessing. Now, this does depend a little bit on the norms within the society that you live, and therefore there are some opinions that say that even nowadays, because it's common to have fruit in the middle of a meal, or more common than it used to be at least, you don't make a blessing on fruit in the middle of a meal. An example of somebody who holds that is Rabbi Ruderman, the founding Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Ner Yisrael, where I studied. So he was of the opinion that nowadays, because it depends on the social norms and what people have in mind when they're making the hamutzi, the blessing on the bread in the beginning of the meal, what's considered standard. So he was of the opinion that you do not make a blessing on fruit in the middle of a meal. And you'll find many students of his, or many students of the yeshiva that I went to, of Yeshiva of Ner Israel in Baltimore, because that was his opinion, they follow his opinion and they will not make a blessing on fruit in the middle of a meal. But other than students from Ner Israel, the standard practice is to make a blessing on fresh fruit, whether it's in the middle of the meal or if you're having fresh fruit for dessert, it does get its own blessing. However, if you're eating the fruit along with the bread, you're taking a little sliver of a strawberry or a grape and you're putting it on your bread, you're eating it along with a little piece of bread, then it's considered secondary to the bread and therefore would not require its own blessing. Now, this is only really with fruit. Things such as pickles, olives, radishes, things of that nature, those are considered part of the meal. Even though it's not like real food, it's not meat and potatoes, but those are still considered part of the meal. They help stimulate the appetite, and those do not get their own blessing. We're only talking about fruit and really fresh fruit even. This concludes today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and see you on the next episode.